There was a movie with Martin Sheen. I know for some of you this is ancient history, back in 1985. And that movie was called The Other Wise Man. Show of hands, how many of you saw that movie, The Other Wise Man? Only a few, okay? I'm just going to give you a 2-minute summary of that and then talk about another movie. So Martin Sheen plays the fourth wise man. The fourth wise man was younger than the rest, but like those four, or the other three, he was an astrologer. He studied scriptures and the traditions of various religious traditions in order to become wise and spiritual. And like the others, he set off with gifts. Instead of gold and frankincense and myrrh, his gifts were 3 precious gems. Now, Artaban was his name. Artaban followed along the way that the 3 other magi had set out before him, following the star like the others. But he always seemed to get himself mixed up in various adventures. And along the way, people in need constantly pleaded with him for help. And as time unfolded and years unfolded, one by one, he cashed in each of these gems as a way of kind of getting the funds to help others out on the way. And it's a worthwhile movie if you haven't seen it. It takes him years to find the Christ. And when he finds him, he's no longer a child. 33 years have passed. And in fact, he comes upon him at his trial in Jerusalem. It's a very powerful scene as he realizes that in fact, the journey has been the destination in many ways. And he has discovered Christ all along his way in his service of the poor. Sister Maureen, is that more or less accurate? Okay. Worthwhile. And I didn't give away the ending. But actually, over the Christmas break, I saw another movie with Martin Sheen, and it's a little bit like an updated story of the Magi, the journey of these wise men. It's called The Way. It'll come out later on this year up here in Syracuse, but I saw it in New York City. I'm going to share the story of The Way with you because I think it has a lot to speak to us about what it means to be a contemporary person on a spiritual pilgrimage seeking the Christ. Martin Sheen plays an ophthalmologist in his 60s who's recently lost his wife, so he's now a widower. He's estranged from his son, played by his actual son, Emilio Estevez. His son is a cultural anthropologist in doctoral studies and decides he's not going to finish his schooling. He's going to head off to Europe and become, a backpacker, kind of just discover his fortune, to the discontent of his father. So they set off in somewhat of a unhappy way as the son heads off to Europe. A few months later, the doctor receives word from the French authorities that tragically his son has been killed in a storm in the French side of the Pyrenees Mountains. And they call him, this doctor, to come and collect his son's body. He flies to Europe, and his plan is really simple. He's lost his wife, he's going to bury his son, but he encounters the officer there, the Frenchman who is responsible for handling his case, who describes to him where his son was. His son was on the first day of a journey along El Camino del Santiago, the famous pilgrimage that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, Christians have made from around the world, across the north of Spain, 800 kilometers. If anyone has an iPhone, you can translate how many miles that is. I think it's a lot. They travel across the north of Spain to the city of Santiago de Compostela. And there, in the cathedral there are the remains of St. James. This journey has been attracting pilgrims all this time because there's something very special that happens when we set off on a spiritual journey, a pilgrimage. It's something of an adventure. We might have intentions that we begin with, but we discover along the way all kinds of surprises. Well, this doctor didn't want to hear any of that. he makes arrangements for the cremation of his son's body. And as he does so, he's going to handle his grief as he does everything else in life, alone, in his own gruff and stubborn way. But something happens to him as he is present to the cremation of his son's body, and then begins to meet some of the various pilgrims setting off on this trip, beginning with this very big Dutchman who's kind of an overgrown kid and lives large and is large. His intention on going on this pilgrimage is actually to lose about 100 pounds because his wife, well, she'll no longer go to bed with him, all right? So it's incentive, right, for him. He is trying to befriend Martin Sheen's character, and Martin Sheen's character will have nothing of it. He wants to do this by himself. But he resolves that he's going to actually make the pilgrimage himself. He's going to complete the journey that his son began. He carries on his backpack, with all his son's supplies, the silver box containing his remains. And his intention is to scatter the remains across those 800 kilometers, and finally to bring him, his son, to this famous cathedral at Compostela. Along the way, there are other travelers besides the Dutchman. There is a woman from Canada who shows up, and she's a bit hard. She's chain-smoking her way through this trip. In fact, her intention is that by the end, she's going to give up cigarettes. But she's a very hard character. And as Martin Sheen's, the doctor, gets to know her, he really finds her so edgy and angry, he wants nothing to do with her either. But along the way, the Dutchman and the Canadian woman follow in his steps. And he's trudging along with his walking stick, the walking stick given to him by his son, stubborn, determined, pausing at various way stations along the way to leave these ashes of his son. They come upon a third character, a very zany Irishman who's an author and a travel writer, and he's got writer's block. So his intention on the pilgrimage is to rediscover his ability to write. All these details, all this struggle between these characters, none of them can really make the way alone. And so along the way, begrudgingly, they begin to form friendships, because none of us can really make the spiritual journey alone, can we? And we often don't necessarily choose our companions on the way. But each of these characters, the four of them, they, like the Magi, carry gifts with them, gifts that they have yet to discover, gifts that are very deep within themselves, that they'll bring forth at various moments on this very long journey. Finally, at the end, after they've had various misadventures and experiences, they're coming to this final destination, this Compostela, this city in north of Spain. And along the way, they've discovered that the reasons that they each set off on this journey are very different from the reasons they've discovered they're actually on this journey. They've discovered these deep bonds of friendship. And even though each of them does not necessarily feel conventionally like a believer, they've also begun to find faith. I'm not going to give away the ending, but it's transformative. It's transformative. Why do I share all this with you? When we hear these readings about the Epiphany of the Lord, there are many things that we could celebrate. The fact that Christ was given not only to the Jewish people, but to all people. That all the Gentiles, all the peoples of the earth, hear and can hear this message of Christ and find their lives transformed. But another reason is this. These Magi, they were curious. They wanted to deepen their relationship with God. They had the desire to prostrate themselves before one greater than themselves, and in that doing of homage, to find satisfaction and meaning in their life that they were missing. And how many of us, at times, feel that same gap in our lives. We're longing for more fulfillment, more love, more peace. And yet, unless we're willing to step out of our comfort zones, it's very unlikely that we'll experience that more. We have to set off on a journey. We have to take risks. We have to trust the goodness of strangers. We have to be willing to set aside all of our security and risk giving of ourselves to those, even those around us who we don't know. To break open our own backpacks and the supplies we carry. To be willing to tell our stories and to share the griefs and the joys that we have in our lives. At the end of it, each of those characters, when they arrived at Compostela, were asked by the person who stamps their passports, "Why did you go on this journey in the first place?" I ask you that question. Why are you here in church tonight, missing the game, right? Why have you made this commitment to follow Christ this way? What is it that you are seeking? And what are you willing to give along the way, like the Magi, these great gifts, because they are lying within you? What is the purpose of your journey? And what are you willing to give of yourself along the way?